Hello, my friends, and welcome back to Momentum Boost. I am your host, Adrienne Gold Davis, just off a plane from Israel, and I'm thrilled to be with you today because this is the season finale of this season's Momentum Boost. So here's the question. Is it possible to achieve true unity, do you think? Can we be united even when we disagree? And how do we argue in a healthy and productive way? So today we're going to have a discussion about the challenges and the rewards of actually welcoming unity into our lives and the three tensions that we tend to encounter along the way. So the recording of this episode this week is timely, even if you're listening to it a year from now in repeat, because we've just marked the day of Tisha B'Av, which is the date of the destruction of the first and the second temples in Jerusalem, among many other disastrous occurrences for the Jewish people. During the time preceding Tisha B'Av, we're inclined to focus on the reason that we're told that the second temple was destroyed in the first place and has not yet merited to be rebuilt. We learn that it was destroyed for the sin of sinat chinam, which means simply baseless hatred. So the simplest understanding in my mind of baseless hatred amongst Jews can be summed up like this. I hate you because you sin in a different way than I do. So this past year has underscored how ubiquitous this attitude can be, and whether in politics or in your own personal relationships at home. We must find a way to maintain human dignity and respect for our fellows' fundamental holiness, even or especially when we profoundly disagree with them. Joining me today is Dr. Elana Stein Hain. She's the Director of Faculty and a Senior Fellow at the Shalom Hartman Institute of North America. She is a widely well-regarded teacher and a scholar. She's passionate about bringing rabbinic thought into conversation with contemporary life. She created Talmud from the Balcony, a learning seminar that exposes the big ideas, the questions, and the issues that are motivating rabbinic discussions. She also leads the Created Equal Research Seminar, which considers the relationships between gender consciousness and Jewish thought. And she co-hosts For Heaven's Sake, a podcast with Daniel Hartman and Yossi Klein Halevi, exploring contemporary issues related to Israel and the Jewish world. It was launched in the summer of 2020, and For Heaven's Sake is a bi-weekly podcast from the Shalom Hartman Institute's I Engage project that revives the lost art of Jewish debate for the sake of illuminating a topic, not sowing division. And as you all know, that's what Momentum is about, unity, not uniformity. The podcast draws its name from the concept of machloket l'shem shemayim, which means disagreeing for the sake of heaven. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Elana Stein Hain. Hi.
Hi, what a joy it is to be with you. And I love that idea of you sin differently than I do. And that's why I have so much vitriol against you. That is such a great way to put it.
It is. I mean, in many ways, it's fundamental basic Psych 101, right? It's projection.
Yes.
In many ways, or that tribal kind of tension that happens when a person moves through life in a different way. And it's not just through religious things. It happens, I find, over the course of the past year, even in my own home, Elana, my husband and I are very politically divided. And I had to work really hard at creating shalom in order to, maintain respect, even when I disagree so profoundly. But we live in a very individualistic society. So what is the value of being part of a community or a group larger than yourself? What do you think?
So I want to start with how countercultural it is that the Jewish story begins precisely with the idea of being part of a collective. When you look at Genesis 12, God talking to Abraham,
right?
God doesn't say to Abraham, I'm going to make you into a group of people who agree with each other, and anybody who accepts fundamental tenets A, B, and C, they're going to be part of your group. No, that's not what it says. God says to Abraham, I'm going to make your progeny a great nation. Right. What a strange thing to base a religious group on. family, genetics.
Oh my.
What do you mean? You don't, who agrees with other members of their family? I mean, you just gave us an example. The idea that the Jewish people is a people and not only a religious group
Right.
that agrees on everything,
Right.
that the disagreements are built in, are a feature, not a bug, based on the fact that it's about family. It's about where you come from. And of course, there are people who choose to become Jewish and they opt in to that familial paradigm. To me, that says there have to be things about being part of a collective that have values. And I'm going to start with humility.
Huh.
Being part of a collective reminds you that you don't have all the answers by yourself to everything. And the idea of being challenged by someone else, it's not about, am I going to be converted to their side of things, or are they going to be converted to my side? But it's actually simply to understand that the world is complex, that life is complex. So that's one piece I would say.
Okay.
A second piece I would say, excuse me, is the idea of being able to just care about someone else. You know, there's this wonderful contemporary philosopher, Martha Nussbaum, and she says every relationship we have has a combination, it has this ambivalence. It has a combination of love and resentment. Because you know what? The people, the more important the people are to you, the more you resent them because you can't control them. You can't control them agreeing with you, disagreeing with you, doing what you want, not doing what you want.
Oh my.
And it is fascinating that she essentially says that's part of what it means to be in relationship, is a recognition of you can love and care for and have solidarity for and take care of and be taken care of by people who you can't control.
Boy, Elana,
So important.
I have to tell you something. You have small children, but if no one understood this, you just have to raise teenagers. And it is that trial by fire. I made so many fundamental mistakes with my teenage sons in an erroneous attempt to control them with what I thought was my righteous indignation, and I know best. And it wasn't until I was able to let go of that we had peace. And I learned this in my own home. You are so right. I'm thinking of something else, though, and I want to ask you as a scholar about this. It also, in that same part of the Torah, when Abraham is told to lech lecha, to go to himself, it does reinforce the idea that there is a fundamental self.
Yes, and I would say there's an irony at the beginning of the Jewish journey and the building of the Jewish people is God saying you have to leave your home. You have to leave what you thought was your collective in order to build a new family. And I think there's truth in the fact that if you have a group identity and the individuals within that group can't find themselves, that group's not going to last very long.
Well, it's an interesting thing I find in family dynamics and even with groups of friends, that it is those who are shakiest about their identities that usually have the hardest time with those who disagree with them. I mean, if you're really comfortable in your own skin and with what you believe, you're able to be open to hearing other people's point of view. I think it's when you're ambivalent yourself that we fight back harder.
It's so interesting. Do you think it's only ambivalence, or when people also feel threatened? Meaning there can be, I can have a lot of conviction about what I think, but what if I'm worried that the tide is turning against what I think?
Yes.
And then when I'm talking to somebody who represents that tide, it might not always be that I don't believe in what I'm saying. It might be that I'm actually scared that I'm becoming a smaller group than I want to be. Like, I think it's both. I think you end up having both.
I think you're right. I think you're right, because I have to say that even as a parent, as a mother, when I felt that my influence was receding, I was most threatened.
Right. And you believe in what you believe in very strongly. It's the fear of, well, what if this doesn't go according to plan? And if COVID's taught us anything, according to whose plan? Yeah, right. Meaning we don't really control all the things. But I also want to bring in another piece of Torah here.
Please.
There is this in the way that that traditions do. I love seeing in Jewish tradition contradictory passages because they underscore complexity. And the book of Proverbs, which, by the way, understudied
I
in
couldn't
many
agree more.
Jewish environments. The book of Proverbs, which is basically a book that is really trying to do the work of helping a person move through life with common sense, with prudence, and figure out how to make good choices. You go to chapter 26 of Proverbs, and I hope that people will do this who are listening and watching.
We'll put it in the chat.
And yeah, you can find it online. Okay. Chapter 26 of Proverbs. You've got two back-to-back verses. The first one says, "Don't answer a fool according to their folly, lest you become like that person."
Right.
And the next verse says, "Answer a fool according to their folly, lest they think that they're wise in their own eyes." So you tell me, we all get pulled into these arguments and conversations.
Right.
And I think there's really a question of, where are the arguments useful? And where are we actually just playing into our own worst instincts, right? Meaning there are places where, of course, you have to be able to give your perspective, and your perspective is going to be differing with other people's perspective. But the idea that we kind of look at each other as fools, and because we look at each other as fools, we become fools, because only a fool thinks that they know everything. Like really only a fool thinks that they know everything. That I just love these back-to-back verses that are telling you, should we not answer? Should we answer? And really the point is, there is a time to argue and there's a time to be willing to set it aside.
How do you think that works with social media? I don't know what you've seen.
Oh gosh.
What a year it's been. I mean, I have people, friends who have, figuratively unfriended on social media and who are now not speaking to people because of the diversity of opinion.
Well, let's start with the fact that in COVID, many of us were just not seeing each other in person. Right. And Sherry Turkell, who's at MIT, a lot of her work is about how social media in general it's taking away our ability to empathize, right? Because you don't see a person's face. You don't see their face. You don't see their reactions. You don't see their bodily movements, and you can kind of ignore their reaction because it's just about what you have to say. So in COVID, we're not even seeing each other. So the only way we're interacting for many of us, or the primary way that we're interacting, is online, where you can't see the other person's face. And so people say things in ways that they would never say if they saw another person. And I have to say that getting back to being in person, I see that people are sometimes using their online voices in person. Like there's an atrophied muscle of slow. It's not all about what you have to say and what you don't have to say. So I try to the best of my ability, if I find that I'm in a conversation where I'm getting heated or the other person is getting heated online, I basically try to say, are we making sure that we're actually talking about the issues rather than letting the fact that we disagree, kind of run the conversation wild? And it's hard work. I mean, I've had conversations with people on Facebook where I've said, nope, you're going to have to try that again. You're going to have to try that again, because the way that you're talking to me and the way that you're arguing, I want to hear your point, but that's not the way to do it. And 9 times, 10 times, 11 times. And by the 11th time, we got to something. And I said, well, I really see the point that you're trying to make. Okay, I couldn't see it before.
But Elana, this goes to a certain humility inherent in you, that you actually do want to hear the other person's point, which is why you put them in a position where they have to speak respectfully to you. Do both parties have to have a measure of humility, or at least a desire to come to some mutual understanding, or is it moot? Or are some people just using their voices and their positions to marginalize any other thoughts?
Well, this is why I think that first verse that I cited in Proverbs of don't answer a fool according to their folly, lest you become like them. There are places, there are contexts in which you basically have to say, this is not a productive conversation, and we're not going to get anywhere. But then there are other places where you actually can get somewhere by having an honest, not ad hominem, really saying, see my face, see what I'm telling you. Let's talk about this offline where you don't have a whole big audience watching, because
Right.
there's always an audience and someone's going to weigh in and jump in. Take it offline and have the conversation offline, right? I think anytime you're trying to change a pattern, it does take both sides to take a pattern, to change a pattern, but you need sometimes one side to be dogged in just not being flagged by the fact that the other side is still in the pattern and saying, nope, we're going to break this pattern. Nope, we're going to break. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But we all know that. I mean, going back to family, we all know that we have certain dynamics within family, and those dynamics happen because the players, both sides, agree to play their role. And when one side's, yes, please, you were saying.
No, I was just going to say, if one person changes the dance, and according to that, it's why people say to me all the time, well, I want to go to marriage counseling, but my spouse does not. I'm like, one person changing the dance can change the entire dynamic.
Yeah.
So that can happen in family therapy as well. Okay, so earlier I read that you talked about 3 particular tensions that come up along the way of trying to make peace between disparaging points of view. Can you walk us through that?
So I think the way I would think about it is, I think there's 2 different questions, right? One is just the question of being part of a collective. Okay. And when you're part of a collective, I think you have the tension between your individual approach and the group approach. And there are times when you're going to disagree with your group and you have to figure out, do I still want to be part of this group, even though I disagree? Are there enough reasons? Is it a zero sum, black and white? I either agree with everything or disagree. And I think in America right now, it's very hard because it's very appealing to say, I either have to agree with everything or I'm out, right? Like that's serious. That's something we really need to think about. And the second tension that I see is just universalism and particularism, right? We're part of a Jewish collective. And what does it mean? Actually,
just hold on a second. Can you stretch that out for our audience, the difference between universalism and...
Oh, certainly. So let's say I'm a person who walks through the world, and I feel myself as being committed to the Jewish people as a people. I also feel myself as being committed to humanity, to human beings in general, no matter who they are, Jewish, not Jewish, however they affiliate.
Precisely.
And I think that sometimes those 2 can be in tension with each other, right? And you have questions like, where do I put my resources, my time, my energy? What do I prioritize? And there's even, I think, big ethical questions in American Jewish life about that. And I think it's really important for those of us who feel commitment to the Jewish people as a particular group and are comfortable with that, to be able to articulate that there's an ethic to that. Meaning the ethic is the same way that I have a different kind of obligation to my children than I have to somebody else's children. I think of my priority in terms of my obligation is to the Jewish people. But then the question is, don't use that, and this is the tension, don't use that as an excuse not to actually take care of anybody else, right? Meaning, I still should pay my taxes. I'm not going to leave my friend's kid out on the curb if I see them waiting for the bus and the bus doesn't, well, it's not my responsibility. I'm just going to let it go. So I think there's tensions within that of figuring out how to have both of those commitments in the ways that people want to have them.
I think Rev Kook talked about this when he talked about the concentric circles of love, that you have to have a solid relationship with self, and then the family, which includes the Jewish people, and then beyond that, all the nations, and beyond that, every animal. But, I heard somebody say once that, the tension there, the dissonance there is that there are people who are, desperately passionate about saving the whales, but don't notice their brother-in-law can't make his mortgage payment.
Right. And I think I think that takes work, right? This really is, we are passionate human beings. We are passionate and we have conviction about something, and it's a beautiful thing. The flip side is that can narrow our ability to see what's
Mhm.
not right in our bullseye, right? Meaning the ability, and it really does, I think, go back to humility, but right alongside humility, I think, or maybe the foundation of humility is honesty,
Yeah.
meaning the ability to be honest about, right? And if you want to go to, if you want to look at Rav Kook, this is a great, I mean, this is one of my favorite teachings of his, where he talks about how in the time of the founding of the state of Israel, or really the flourishing of Zionism, I should say, he talks about how he sees three camps warring within the Jewish people. The people who stand for Jewish nationalism, the people who stand for Jewish universalism, cosmopolitanism, and the people who stand for Jewish religious observance. And he says, in a healthy situation, in a healthy ecosystem, you actually want all three of those forces.
Yes.
Not because they're going to convert each other, but because each of them will have an impact on the other and remind the other that they have to balance what it is that they're doing with an understanding of the other side. And that's a pretty big thing for a guy who dressed the way Rav Kook dressed.
Indeed.
If you saw Rav Kook, you would not expect the kind of expansive diversity of human beings who showed up at his funeral, right? But it's because he understood things like this. What does it mean to have honesty about what's needed to make it healthy? Of course, you need people who care about the nation, the people, the human, the body politic. Of course, you need people who care about humanity. Of course, you need people who care about the religious observance. And they all need to be in conversation with each other, not what we do now, which is sort of this guilt by association of, well, if you're going to be friends with that one, you're obviously not real about your commitment. What? What if I want to learn something? What if I think I learned something from the interaction?
All right. So now I'm going to ask you to narrow this, funnel it down into
Sure.
family life. Many of our viewers are mothers. Many of our viewers have struggled over the course of this year with this sort of dissonance. Help us understand how to maintain intimacy and closeness with someone that you profoundly disagree with, how to argue like Rav Kook, how to listen like a mensch, how to dial up your humility. Are there any things you can say to yourself? What questions do you have to ask yourself? And especially in family life where you're in it for the long haul.
Yeah. So two things. One is, I think, and by the way, I hope I follow my own advice, right? And this is me putting myself on record so that my family members say, hey, but mom, you said that, or hey, but Elana, you said that. Two things. Number one, if it's about individuals, it's always a zero-sum game. It's always a zero-sum game. If my family is about, there are 4 individuals, it's a zero-sum game. But if we're a unit, then it's, how can I keep this unit going, right? Meaning it's not just, I want this, they want that. It's, what are we as a family unit? What makes up our family unit, our family ecosystem? What are the colors that we have in our family rainbow? That's the first thing. The second thing that I'm going to say is, I always want to ask, and it's really hard. It's really hard. It's really hard. I always want to ask, what am I learning? What am I learning from the differences? And by the way, it could take me years to figure it out, right? Meaning I could say, what am I learning? And in the meantime, I'm fighting, I'm pushing, I'm this, I'm that. And it's like, at some point, like 6 months later, I'm like, oh, that's what I'm learning. Okay, got it. And then we change the way we interact. And I think if we ask, what am I learning rather than what are you doing, right? There's a responsibility, there's an agency of our own, of figuring out how do we change the pattern, whatever that pattern is.
And what about those tensions that we just started to touch on a little earlier? What can we expect along the route?
I think life is a marathon and not a sprint. And I think that people have to experiment a little bit, meaning you may decide that you're going to try, let's say if we're talking about the universalist and the particularist, or we're talking about the individual and the collective, you may decide to make a decision at one point in your life that looks like, if I don't agree, I'm pulling out. You may decide you don't have to stick to that. You can change, you can go back, you can, or you might do the opposite. You might say, I'm sticking with it, even though I disagree. And then at some point you might say, actually, I'm realizing it's too different. It doesn't work. I can't find myself. Like you said, I can't find the lech lecha. I can't find the, go for yourself in there. And particularism, universalism as well, meaning the idea of there are different times in your life where you're going to focus on different things and in different proportions. And I think we need to be patient and recognize that this is life's work and it's different contexts. And it's not, everybody wants a state of the union. That's what we're trying. There's no state of the union. It's process. Life is the process of figuring these things out. And I think through honest conversation, not for the purpose of divisiveness, exactly as you started, but for the purpose of actually developing our thoughts about things, there's no limit to the kind of capaciousness we can have as people.
I can tell you as a mother, and I referred earlier to some of the mistakes I made in trying to force my hand in the earlier years of their teens. I can tell you that the reward of taking the approach that you've put out is to have relationships with your adult children that are exponentially beyond anything you'd ever had. So I'm going to warn you and wish you luck, because you got—
It's not a joke. I know. I hear you also being so honest about your own experiences. It's so refreshing. And yes, I'm sure I can see the horizon already.
Yeah, well, you know what? It's clear. This is what I'm taking from this, among a million other things, including the fact that I want to speak with you many more times because you're my new girl crush. I'm telling you, seriously. I feel like what you said earlier on, we're a family, the Jewish people. If we use the model of family, would you cut off your sister? Well, no, because we would cut off our sister. We'd murder our brother, right? We've got that in Genesis. Would you cut off your own child if you didn't agree? Would you end relationships if you didn't agree? The work that we put in as mothers to stay in peace with our children, we need to do as Jews and the entire Jewish nation.
I love that.
I
love that. It's taking a muscle we already have and saying, use it in other places too. It's great.
You are magnificent.
Oh, this was a joy. Thank you for having me.
We had more time. It breaks my heart that we don't have any more time, but I want to thank you for joining us today.
My
this was our
absolute
season
pleasure.
finale, and you were my highlight. And this has been such a powerful conversation for me. I want to unpack it further. There's been a lot of questions and a lot of comments, and God willing, you'll join me again.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, my love. So
be well, everyone.
You be well. Oh, I'll be taking your advice. So we're taking a few weeks off. We're taking a hiatus this summer, and we're going to be back to you in August with another season of extraordinary programming, more inspiring guests, and all the wisdom you've come to expect from us. Now, if you miss us while we're gone, don't worry about it. You keep tuning in on Monday nights at 8 p.m. We're going to re-air some of your favorite boosts from this past year, featuring our most incredible, impactful guest experts. You just have to check us out on Facebook. It's going to be there. There'll be lots of promotion for it. But right now, I'd be so grateful if you just take a minute, fill out the poll that's going to come up. It helps us to provide you with relevant and meaningful programming for you. So I thank you for doing that. And before we go off for our summer break, let me remind you one more time that as we learn and grow and argue and disagree with one another, that the highest form of wisdom will always be kindness. See you soon.